We're good. Okay. As Spencer mentioned, I have what I consider to be the best job at Microsoft, leading a creative shop inside of Microsoft that is charged with charting the future and exploring the boundaries of where consumers and marketers and technology intersect. And what I'd like to do today is share a few of the principles that we see as foundational for how the future will look in terms of one particular aspect of the art that we create, and that's storytelling. Storytelling is fundamental from our perspective in that it represents the essential exercise of what advertising sets out to do. And it also represents one of the great pitfalls of where technology often steps in, which is trying to create technology for technology's sake and not keeping in mind what are we actually delivering for the consumer? What are we actually delivering that will solve some kind of human need, satisfy some kind of personal interest that consumers have? And this is so fundamental. I wanted to use one example. Excuse me. Should have turned this off. One example is the way that we do research around the world and show images like this. And I think many of us have seen this before. Regardless of what market we go to, regardless of what demographic we're talking to, regardless of age, gender, any of the traditional ways that we divide people up in the world, people will look at an image like this and they will very easily come up with the story that's in this image. And typically it will sound like the big, scary monsters chasing the little fellow down the tunnel. Something along those lines. And if you probe further, and even if you don't probe further, oftentimes we'll hear people describe the emotion, the backstory, the further context, what might happen in the future. And it's amazing the ways that people will create meaning from a very, very simple image. Now, the trick here, again, as I think everyone has seen at some point in their lives, is that the images are exactly the same. There is no big monster and little creature, right? They are exactly the same image. It's the additional shading and perspective that's created that allows us so many different hooks to create a story where in fact there is none here. I'll come back to this metaphor several times because it's important, because what we're seeing here is that, again, across the globe, people are looking for ways to create stories, to create meaning in the world around them. At the same time, brands are essentially looking to tell stories that resonate with consumers. It's this intersection of consumer need and brand need that we see very fascinating within the digital space. Many people over the course of the conference have talked about the importance of looking at the history of media. By looking back, we can learn a great deal about what we're in for in the future. We feel the same way. We are rabid historians in terms of looking at how did telephony start, how did television start, how did film start. And film is a particularly interesting example for us in that when the film camera was first invented, it was used to create a new mass medium. And the content was, for the most part, live theater plays that were being performed where the camera was placed in the center aisle, center row of the audience to film a play that could then be replicated and transformed and moved and shown to lots of other audiences. That paradigm of the camera sitting in the center aisle, center row persisted for more than a decade because it took more than a decade for someone to realize if we move that camera closer to the stage, we might actually be able to see the actors' faces. And we might be able to create blocking and different scenes and different techniques for telling the story. That metaphor is very strong for us because we believe in the digital space today, we're still relatively with the camera sitting in the center row, center aisle. We have begun to figure out how that camera can move, and we've begun to figure out what is the language that we need to develop, particularly as we think about the evolution of television and the evolution of how content is delivered on various screens. That's really the setup that I want to provide. Now I just want to show a number of examples of what we and others have created that we think best exemplify the ways that this language is developing and the ways that we can tell stories in more and more compelling ways that are not obvious given the paradigms that we've come from in the past and given the ways that we have, in some ways, failed to predict how the future will roll out given the changes in technology and changes in consumer behavior. Let me start by showing a couple of examples where we have begun to explore what can be done with social. And social from the perspective of telling stories that resonate with consumers because they come from consumers and expressions from consumers that also resonate with a brand. In this example, we did work for Lexus. The brand challenge here was Lexus launching the new CT hybrid vehicle. And obviously for Lexus, moving into the hybrid space, needing to reach out to consumers to encourage them to think about Lexus in a slightly different way. And beyond just reaching existing consumers, reaching a new consumer base who maybe had not considered Lexus previously. Specifically, that meant looking for a less affluent, slightly younger audience than Lexus typically reaches out for. So again, I have the luxury of running this, looking after this creative team within Microsoft, and we have designers, developers, brand strategists, a service team, and collectively we brainstorm and come back with ideas like this. And this is what we in fact launched. So this is called Fresh Perspectives, and this was centered around a web reality show where we had different artists who represent different fields like music, paper, art, fashion, all coming together and solving a common problem and seeing how different perspectives on a single problem really opened up the way that for consumers, Lexus wanted to have this notion of fresh perspectives manifested through this campaign. In addition to creating this web experience, we also wanted to do something where we would cater to what we knew was particularly interesting about this audience in that they are hyper-social and they are very keen on experiencing things that just cry out to be shared with other people. So what we did was we created this application called Paint Your Profile. And what you do is you log in, and what the application does is it scrapes your Facebook profile for all the data available. So where are you from? Where do you work? How many friends do you have? How many friends do your friends have? All of the data that's available, and turns it into, in nerdy terms, input into a unique piece of abstract art that we create on the fly. So it's taking my profile, first names of my friends, weaving them together, telling me that some basic information about my profile, and then creating this flash art on the fly. We think this is an important step in how do we take data that's already available, right, on your Facebook profile, but turning it into something that's far more expressive and something that is, again, crying out to be shared with friends. And this is the kind of thing that also allows us to explore how do we get consumers to express themselves in new ways that don't involve a lot of effort, and in this case also is highly protective of personal information, that we don't reveal anything that wouldn't already be on your Facebook page, and do it in a way that's also elegant and reinforces, in this case, Lexus's desire to have people see themselves, see the brand in a new way. Since launching this, I'm going to assume many, if not most of you or all of you, have seen the Intel Museum of Me, which is another fantastic manifestation of how you can grab Facebook data and turn it into something that is not only, again, something consumers really find elegant and beautiful, but reinforces, in that case, the Intel brand. But it's this notion of how do we start to leverage all the tools that are available to us, not just because they're cool or they do something fun and interesting, but are reinforcing that basic human need of wanting to express yourself and also doing it in the service of a brand objective. Now, the next example I want to show you, you will see very clearly, is several years old now, but it also represents the way that we see the evolution of storytelling. In this case, we're looking at a technology called photosynth. And photosynth is a way to take massive amounts of images, look for the common pixel patterns that then allow us to stitch those photographs together into a single three-dimensional experience. In this case, what CNN did with this was took professionals as well as just regular people who were at the inauguration and said to them, take a photograph at the moment that President Obama takes the oath of office. And with these photos, and there's 628 in total, and running them through photosynth, we get this very nice three-dimensional experience where we can weave through and survey the crowd. And if we wanted to, zoom in on a particular area of the audience and really see a nice representation that incorporates, again, professional and individual photographs into a single image. Now, the funny thing about innovation and invention is that they're not the same thing. The invention here is this technology called photosynth. The innovation here is that sometimes we come up with ways to use inventions that were not originally intended by the inventor. And in this case, what CNN did was they said to people who were not actually in Washington, D.C., take a photograph of the screen at the moment of the oath and send them in. And what photosynth is doing is now stitching those together. And what you get is this really lovely experience where you see how did all these people viewing all around the world experience that particular moment of the oath of office. And you'll see there's, I don't know why people have chickens in their house while they're watching television, but you see an amazing amount of pets in these images. Obviously, you see people's homes, you see people at school, public places, classrooms. And when you watch this, you really are transported into the hundreds of different ways that people experience this particular moment. We think this is a particularly evocative form of storytelling that takes what is often a big challenge for us and a challenge for marketers, which is how do you take all the user-generated stuff that consumers might provide for a campaign and not end up with a thumbnail gallery where people have to click through and don't really get a sense of what that content really is all about. In this case, this is a moment in time that was shared by millions of people. And whether it was at the physical location in Washington, D.C. on the mall, or with your 4 babies in front of the television at home, it begins to generate the kind of emotion that we think is missing from a lot of these user-generated content campaigns. And again, deploys the technology in a way that was not originally envisioned. Moving a little bit further, using some of the same technologies, I'm now going to move into what I'll call, if we've covered where we are now, we're now going to look at a bit into where do we think we're going around the corner. And then later I'll talk a little bit about where I think we're going around the block and maybe even into the next postcode. One of the projects we did recently for Intel was around their partnership with Vice magazine in sponsoring these wonderful art exhibits called the Creators Project. And they're held in cities around the world. This was work we did around the one in Beijing, where the challenge was the Intel value proposition is really centered around innovation, which everyone is obviously familiar with as a technology company, but also creativity. And how can we reinforce both of those brand values for Intel? And again, they sponsored these wonderful art exhibits, and it's great for the people who are able to see exhibits like this. It's a beautiful light curtain. But what about people who aren't able to experience it? Is there a way that we could deliver this experience, and again, in a way that reinforces the notion of creativity and innovation? So this image deploys the technology called Deep Zoom. And this image, this iconic image from Beijing, is in and of itself made up of 4,000 different images from the Creators Project, whether it's the concerts or it's the panel discussions, whether it's the different art exhibits themselves. You see a really interesting way to take lots and lots of imagery that, in this case, again, some professionally produced, some generated by just regular people, and bring it together in a way that is in the service of this single brand image. So you can imagine that this could be a logo, this could be anything that a brand wanted to represent. So the ways that people will discover and explore and experiment with content when they're not clicking through and opening different windows, but rather exploring in this kind of way, we find very compelling from a storytelling perspective. Where we went a little bit further was to try and see how can we enable storytelling through additional technology that might be somewhat counterintuitive. In other words, going backwards a bit. So we have a technology that was developed within Microsoft Research called SenseCam. And SenseCam is a camera that's about the size of this that takes a photograph every 15 or 30 seconds based on whatever you want to set it at, and also looks for changes in lighting conditions. Have you left the room and gone outside? Have you gone from outside into a darkened room? Snaps a photo. And what you can do with this is create fairly crude and very, very low production value stop-action photography, where in this case, for example, we've taken it and put it inside one of the art exhibits that's this lovely flashing staircase, right? And again, this isn't intended to be highly polished HD type experiences, but it's nice because you can see it and it doesn't cost a whole lot to create. And what it represents for us is an important step in the democratization of media. And this is where we somewhat stumbled upon, well, instead of just putting it into one of the art galleries, what if we gave it to one of the artists and had her wear it around her neck as she navigated these art galleries? So you are essentially standing in the shoes of that artist and looking at whatever she looked at, lingering at whatever piece or whatever concert or whatever panel discussion that she lingered at, going behind pieces of art that you would maybe never have thought of going behind. This form of storytelling, because it is so cost-effective and so easy, and it really is so passive, represents for us something that could be quite compelling in many aspects as we think about how it could be deployed for brands. So for example, we thought about brand celebrities. How would you potentially give this to a celebrity for, we've talked about at concerts, giving it to Lady Gaga, not while she's on stage, but backstage. Or I think even more interestingly, giving it to Lady Gaga on her day off in Memphis. What does she go and see in Memphis on her day off, right? What are the things that she does? And being able to tell these stories, even for regular consumers, putting on the dash of your car and looking and be able to record all the things you do in the course of a day. How do moms share the information about the best way to navigate a day raising an infant? Lots of different ways that we could see this deployed. Now, moving a little bit further down the spectrum, I want to show you where we are very excited about how we move through the next big innovation around interaction. We've talked about TV quite a bit the last couple of days, and I will say I have a very, very simple experiment that very, very few people take me up on. If you want to see the future of television, there's a very simple way to do that. And that is to take your PC and do something that most people do not do today, even though it's extraordinarily easy. Grab an HDMI or an RGB and plug it into the back of your flat screen at home and see what happens. When you do that and you have all the capabilities of your PC on your television, you get a glimpse into what the future will look like. And the simplest way to understand the power of that is not to watch Netflix or Hulu or some online streaming, but it's to run your photos as your screensaver on your largest screen. The moment you do that, and the moment that you see your photos on a 50-inch or a larger screen, and that you see it running all day long, you begin to understand that you no longer pass through the living room or the family room in the same way, because you'll see, wow, there's the photos of my daughter's first birthday, or there's the trip that we all took together, and people will stop and use the living room in a very different way, which is to share memories, to spark conversations, to drive emotional connections that weren't there. When the television screen becomes such a highly personalized device, it really begins to evoke the kinds of connections that we dream of as marketers. So I encourage you to think about the future in that way. One of the reasons we know that people don't plug in their PCs and use them with their flat screens is that there's a barrier in the fact of you need a keyboard and a mouse, and where do you put that in your living room? This is where, if you're not familiar with the Kinect technology, this is what we've developed that allows us on the Xbox platform to control content and experiences with voice and with motion. And this is just a clip from the upcoming release for Star Wars. And just to be clear, the Kinect does not shoot lasers into your actual living room. That's just an embellishment. But being able to control a game with your body, being able to control with your voice is obviously a gigantic step forward in terms of how we can interact with lots and lots of content. Now, the video game example is the easiest because people get that. Kinect's been a very successful product. It's lots and lots of people are using it. Where I want to go next is an aspect of this technology that people are not as familiar with that we think is huge in terms of revolutionizing the way that we interact with the largest screen in our home and with each other. So everyone, I assume, is familiar with avatars, and we create avatars within, whether it's the Wii or it's the Xbox, to represent ourselves to the outside community. And it's also just plain fun to create avatars. And it's sometimes shocking how accurate they can appear. And also unfortunate as you progress through life, your avatar sometimes has less and less hair on top, and that can be accurately represented as well. Now, having avatars as a way to represent ourselves is, again, well known, but the ways that avatars can interact with one another is now taking a leap forward. And this is a very, very important aspect of the social ways that we see the space developing. What I'm going to show you is just a clip of Avatar Connect, which, because Kinect now can see finger motion, not just a fist, and can see facial expressions, we have the ability to represent you in social interactions and conversations with your friends. So, what can we do? We can create, and we have created, 15 different settings where your avatar can interact with other people. At a tailgate party, if you're arguing about who's going to win the particular sporting match that day, we can set up a talk show format where you and your friends have just watched Mad Men, not in the same place, but all around the world, and you can host a show where you talk about what you did or did not like about the episode. We have campfires, we have beauty parlors, we have all kinds of settings where you can imagine consumers getting together and sharing opinions and sharing stories about topics that are of interest to them. This is a really, really important step forward in terms of how do we gather together in online spaces. Now, let me address the question that almost always comes up at this point, which is, well, why wouldn't you just show me? Why do you need the avatar? Because you clearly can show me myself in high definition. Why do we need this intermediating force of the avatar? And this is where, at Microsoft, obviously, we spend lots and lots of time studying office productivity. It's a big focus of ours, obviously because of our interest in understanding how can we make employees more productive. And we have spent lots and lots of time and money on researching how do we get higher and higher definition, higher and higher fidelity webcam connections so that you can talk to your colleagues in Madrid and they can talk to the colleagues in Japan in really high quality video formats. What we have learned is that nobody wants to be represented in front of their colleagues in high definition, high fidelity, because everyone would prefer to look better than they actually look in real life. And if they could control, and this is what we learned, the feedback was, well, we'd like to blur the background first because I don't want people to know that I'm home and that there's a cat running in the back or there's a dog barking or that my children are there. And more importantly, can I improve the way I look? Can I add makeup? Can I add hair? Can I add better clothing? And so the insight is people would rather represent themselves in a more, you pick the adjective, beautiful, elegant, healthy way, right? And this is where the avatar becomes a really important tool in terms of helping people control the way they look and making them feel more comfortable and really enjoying the social interactions even more. One other aspect of where we're looking into the future is around, because we have speech recognition and gesture recognition within the Kinect and Xbox Live platform, being able to take standard 30-second spots and bringing interactivity to them. And I feel like we've all been coming to conferences for 20 years now talking about interactive advertising. This is the layer that we've got in the works, something called New Ads for next year, where during a Prius ad you can say Xbox near me. Because the Xbox knows your location, can find the local dealer that's closest to you, send a text to your mobile, and help you to complete that transaction. It's a very simple overlay that we can put onto advertising that increases the ability, obviously, to be able to tell the story, and in this case also move down the transaction funnel that the advertiser is looking for. Now, we've gone from looking at the present, looking a bit around the corner. Now I want to give you a view around the block or even further. One of the biggest areas of innovation has been in mapping, and loads of work that we've done, that Google have done, lots of innovation where, if you think about it, in our lifetimes, we've gone from physically unfolding a map to where we have the full ability through online to be able to see locations, get traffic information, all of the robust information that would have been unimaginable only a generation ago. Extraordinarily useful tool, high utility. We think there's new potential in mapping to tell stories and to drive emotional connections. I will show you an example of what we've built. It's not an available product. Again, I'm giving you a peek into the future. But what we can do, for example, is take photos from Flickr and, using that photosynth technology I mentioned earlier, weave them into maps so that they're in the proper location of where they were taken. So in this case, we're looking up and down Market Street in San Francisco. And if I move around here, you can see one of the pictures that we've taken from Flickr and woven in is from the Chinese New Year parade. I can also click in here and you can start to look at historical photographs. You can look at, here's a protest. Imagine that, a protest in San Francisco. And you can hover around and see where these photos belong. The idea here is really around, we can travel in time, right? What did Times Square look like on New Year's Eve? What did Times Square look like on New Year's Eve 5 years ago? What did Times Square look like on the day that I was born? And the way that brands could use this to tell their stories about the ways that they've evolved, and taking a San Francisco example, the Levi's manufacturing plant has always started out in San Francisco. How has that evolved over time? How have fashions changed? You can imagine a lot of different ways that you could tell stories with this kind of technology. We've also got ways that we can embed even more of an experience into maps, where we can take the photos, include video, and go into physical locations in a virtual way. So imagine a storefront that would be embedded into a map where you could virtually enter the front door, explore the inside, and I'll fast forward this a little bit. While inside, even go to the level of examining the art on the wall, and you could easily imagine adding metadata and saying, okay, where could you buy this piece of art? And the implications for retail, or even honestly, if you could share this experience of your trip to Disneyland, your wedding, the ways that we can empower storytelling are, I think, quite fantastic. And not that far out in the future. It's really about giving the tools to people to be able to do this kind of thing. what I want to end with is an example of where we are also playing with the ways that this technology can be developed even further, and the ways that we think that storytelling will evolve. What you're seeing here is something called digital narratives. And digital narratives is somewhat abstract, and I'll do it in 15 seconds. Here you see a grandmother and her granddaughter telling a story about this ancient temple in India. So this is a straightforward video. You can imagine this in any format today. What we've done is now created a tool, an authoring tool, where they can add maps, they can add video, and make the story much more robust. The key here is that when they reach portions of the story where they've, for example, added some photography, we can depart from the linear story and go off and explore on our own. So here they're talking about the temple, and this is a photo they took. So I can now stop, and I can explore a 360-degree view of the site where the family visited and is the locus of the story that this grandmother is telling. And if I wanted to zoom in, I could zoom out. This notion of how do we break linear storytelling and allow exploration, and also put it into the hands of regular consumers where they could take this on, is a very, very powerful way that we see the notion of linear television and content developing. Where I want to end is just quickly with, recently my parents decided they were going to move from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. And I went through and I helped them box up all their stuff. And we came across a lot of photos which I had never seen before, including baby pictures of me and my parents when they got married, and my dad's high school identification card from Korea. As part of this, my mom also told me how they used to exchange reel-to-reel tapes through the U.S. Army soldiers who, during the Korean War, would help carry them back to the U.S. to relay messages to my mom's brother, who happened to be living in Connecticut at the time. And it would take 3 months, right, for these tapes to go back and forth. And if you think about that compared to the way that many of us, and I certainly communicate while on the road through Skype or through another video service over the television to my daughter at home in Seattle, that one generation of having to record messages on a reel-to-reel tape that took 3 months to instant video communication really, I hope, leaves the same impression that leaves on all of us. There's so much potential for changing the way that we tell stories, and again, the way that consumers can tell stories, and brands can actually leverage that as well for advancing their objectives. I've shown you a lot of different areas that we're particularly excited about and we see as foundations and principles for how storytelling will continue to evolve. I thank you very much for your time, and I'll say I look forward to all of us working together to continue to drive that evolution and telling stories together. Thank you.
Thank you.